Hey, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be coming in from. I just want to welcome you guys back to another webinar series with myself, Howie Scott, and my good buddy Steve. We also have my good friend Tracy in the background, fielding questions and putting out some awesome information. So, really excited about today's topic. We're talking about trauma-informed care, and a topic that really, unless you're in the industry, doesn't get a whole lot of publicity. And from knowing about it and learning more about it, it's more and more prevalent each and every day that people we come in contact with in just our everyday life. And clients are those who have suffered trauma. And it could, also be ourselves, right? So I think it's a
Absolutely.
really important topic to cover. Just real quick, I'm going to talk about who I am. If this is your first time on here, pass it over to Steve, and we'll get rolling after that. So like I said, my name is Howie Scott. I was a law enforcement officer for 31 years, ran the gamut from working in confinement to patrol. The majority of my career was spent on a full-time SWAT team, and then finished up my career working in the academy with recruits and incumbent officers. So Steve, let them know a little bit about you.
Right on. I too am excited to be here today. I'm a huge fan of trauma-informed care. Again, my name's Steve Naglosky. First 17 years of my professional career, I worked in residential treatment, juvenile males, 12 to 17, and everything from direct care staff. My original shift was 3 in the afternoon till 8 in the morning. So I was the guy that got to facilitate those groups at night, help clients work through some of those tough conversations that they were having with home. And then I was the first face they saw in the morning, which is not always fair to everyone else. But since then, I worked my way up. I became assistant director of a program, and then I started and ran a group home for 5 years in northern Wisconsin, same client base. And then 4.5 years ago, I came on full time with CCG. I had been a site trainer for quite a few years prior to that, where I just trained those CCG and CES fundamentals within the organization that I was employed at. But really excited to be here.
Great, Steve. Thanks for telling us about your background. And just, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, Steve and I are both now working for a crisis consultant group and have done for full-time for the past 4 years. I took 4 days off in between jobs just because I believe so much in the program. My primary spot on the team is the active shooter active threat response lead, and also teach CES, which is Calm Every Storm. And then Steve on the other side of the house, he's our lead as far as the Calm Every Storm or the de-escalation side of the house. So like I said, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that. You're like, well, what are you guys doing now?
Right.
So just real quick, I'd like to talk about the chat on the side. This trauma-informed care, like I said, it is a concept, unless you're in the business of treating clients that are known to have trauma, is not really talked about that much, and it's so prevalent. So if you have any experiences you'd like to share with us or questions, this really falls well within Steve's wheelhouse as far as what he has experienced over the past 17 years and continues to experience when we go out and teach. So it's a great opportunity to learn. You never stop learning. So I don't want to stop learning today. If someone has something they want to put in the chat of value, great to share it with everybody.
Absolutely.
So first of all, so just looking at, and trying to find what I think, and Steve and I agree with, is a really good definition of trauma-informed care. Talk about, it's a picture. It's a picture of the client's life, both their past and their present, right? And really being able to identify with that and understand what that picture represents. Steve, you got any follow-up on what the definition, means in layman's terms? Because once again, I know we have some folks looking at it right now that have limited experience in what actually trauma-informed care is.
I think it's being mindful that different situations impact people differently, and we never know what someone's been through. So we can't just make an assumption. Um, I know back in the day, kind of the philosophy was this is how it's done. And
Mm.
now I think we need to look at how can we include choice and how can we make the client an active participant in the treatment. So it's mindful, and I strongly believe it's more of a team approach.
Ah, very good, very good. So, referring back to, especially if this is your first time of being introduced to what trauma-informed care is, I do want to throw out one study. It's a very famous study, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, but it's an ACE study that was done by the CDC. And it
Yeah.
talks about ACE stands for adverse childhood experiences, right? And what those might be. And if we start to think about the types of events that might take place in a child's life, and how they carry that through with them and don't receive treatment. We often talk about abuse, which could be emotional, mental, or physical. And then there's things that happen in a household. So a parent, a mom could be abused, or there could be alcohol or drug addiction, separations, neglect, both emotionally and physical. And those are some of the contributing factors to the trauma that sets in at an early age. I think Steve, you had some actual stats on what who it affects the most and the time frame.
Well, yeah. So I pulled up some CDC stats as well. Excuse me, but it showed that 1 in 4 women throughout their life and 1 in 71 men will experience rape at one point in their life. Um, of those people, 12% of the women and 30% of the men will have been younger than 10 years old when that trauma has impacted them. Um, and so just looking at that, and to me, that was a surprising statistic that so many people had been affected by something as significant as a rape case.
Yeah, and not to play that off or anything because the horrificness of that particular event, but that's just one. That's just
Right,
one event, right? So we're not talking about kids who are in the home of alcohol or drug addiction or
right.
physical abuse, and the numbers start to climb higher and higher. They reference in their study that 61% of adults in a 25-state study had one or more of the events happen in their childhood age. And
Absolutely.
you break it down even further. I had 0 to 17 is when these events occur.
Hmm.
The issue is, and not so much for you, and I'd like for you to talk about that in just a second because you encountered those people soon after the event took place, right? Or
Right.
may still be going on. But a lot of us who work with adult clients have no knowledge base of what that abuse was, and we're wondering why this person's acting out or can't wrap their head around the treatment we're trying to provide them. And I think it goes back to that definition of not having a full picture. And a lot of times we don't allow them to hold the brush, right? We got all the paint and we got all the brushes, and we're going to paint the picture, which reverts back to you saying, this is the way we do things here.
Right. And so I had read an article the other day from the Harvard Journal. And it was talking about, so we've got these doctors going through med school and they're having their initial interaction with patients, right? And it was a brother and sister came in for regular vaccinations. And we know nobody likes shots, right? But mom tells little sister, hey, you need to get this shot. There's mom and the nurse are trying to hold sister down while they're administering this shot. Sister finally gets away. She runs across the room, cowers, puts her arms out, says, don't touch me. Little brother gets in front of her and says, leave her alone.
Oh, wow.
Right. So, like, a very emotional, um, it's a stressful situation. They ended up deciding not to give the vaccination that day and later learned that the children got removed from the home because of abuse. And so that simple vaccination was a window into what that trauma had been.
Yeah, I think that's a really good segue into where I was going to go next because it's something you have a great deal of experience in. And coming from a law enforcement background, the knowledge base is starting to get out there, but it really wasn't done during my career about triggers, right? And
Mm-hmm.
understanding what triggers are, which leads right into what we do as a profession as far as de-escalation, right? And how that comes into play. And, it used to be we can do this one or two ways, the easy way or the hard way, right? Which really
Right.
isn't choices.
Right.
So I think now law enforcement is starting to get more involved in the art of de-escalation, which allows you to figure out if this is actually a trigger, if it's drug induced, alcohol induced, but the actual behavior being demonstrated at that point in time, could it be more? In the time, the reason to take time, right? As long as there's not anybody in immediate danger
Mm-hmm.
of hurting themselves or other people, that's something as a law enforcement community we have to start to understand that we have time to deal with that person that's in
Right.
crisis. So I'm
Right.
going to ask you now, just based on your experience, um, what have been some of the triggers that you've personally witnessed, and some
Right.
of the triggers that we need to be aware of in our day-to-day life?
Well, triggers can truly run the gamut, from a sight, a sound. Um, it can be walking into a building. It can be clothes. It could be a cologne. So I like to wear cologne. But if I'm working with a client who their abuser wore the same cologne, just that scent can be a trigger, right? And where I'm trying to smell nice and look nice and be comforting, inadvertently that smell can be a trigger. I wanted to share a story early on. Um, when I first became introduced to trauma informed care, the facility I had worked at was very structured, almost boot camp like. And I had a client come in, and thankfully, I had the opportunity to review his files and learn about some of his past and what could be trauma for him. Um, but this young man's showed up. We're in northern Wisconsin. He's got a heavy winter coat on, and it's late spring, early summer, and the coat really wasn't appropriate attire for for the temperatures we were having for that time of year. And back in the day, kind of you said my way or the highway, the easy way or the hard way, I would have told this kid, all right, coat needs to go into lockup and you can get it when you're discharged. But having had the opportunity to review files and review history, I found that he and mom were homeless for over a year. So they survived a northern winter.
Mm.
Um, Mom ended up dropping him off at a family member's house, saying she's coming back, never came back. So we've got that abandonment. Um, Family member couldn't care or meet the level of care that this client needed. So he went into the foster care system. And in a year and a half, he had been through 13 different homes. And with that, um, some of it was due to his behaviors that he needed to move on, but some of them were due to funding, things beyond his control. And I realized that he didn't have a lot of personal belongings anymore. And that jacket truly was a lifeline for him. It was a security blanket. And so I approached him that first day, and instead of saying that authoritative, you need to, you're going to, I said, can we work collectively? I'm like, hey, will you run to town with me? Let's see if we can find you a comfortable spring coat. And the kids said, I'm not getting a different coat. I'm like, that's fine, but will you go look with me? He did. We were able to find one, and Um, we came back. Now, historically, I would have said again that that coat, his heavy winter coat, needed to go into lockup. But I knew what that jacket meant to him, that it was so much more than a jacket. I said, are you comfortable with just leaving it in your closet so you can get to it anytime you need, but we can wear this other coat that's more comfortable? He agreed to it and actually had a little rip on the pocket. And I said, man, you may not believe this, but I can sew. Will you let me sew your pocket? And he agreed to that. So as soon as I left, I started making calls, trying to find somebody that could help teach me how to sew so I could properly sew that pocket. But I made sure that I was back early, that I could get that jacket to him. Through his stay with us, we never had to go physical, or I didn't have to go physical with him because of that relationship and rapport that I was able to build with him. And I really think that that's one of the cornerstones of trauma-informed care, is doing our due diligence and researching and finding as much about the client as we can so that we understand what potential triggers might be.
Right on. And such a great story. And I get chills every time you hear it, and I've heard it plenty about that.
Right.
But I think what you did there, and one thing I'm going to ask you to do while I'm talking, is if you could just take a look at Mackenzie's questionnaire in the chat and see if you want to respond to it, or if we can, talk about the programs that might be able to help her. But also shout out to Ivana from Paraguay, right? That's pretty big. So thanks for joining us. I don't even know what time it is there, but but talking about that and taking the last part of trauma-informed care, what you demonstrated there, and what is, I think, a catalyst for everybody to involve themselves in, is the care part, right? Not just the work part, but you have to care if you're dealing with people, right? I think that's why most people get into the professions of nursing, counseling, law enforcement. It's the care, to be there for someone on their bad day, right? So I think that that's a tremendous testimony as to how you presented a culture to where you work about caring. And we all are leaders, right? It doesn't, if you just, because you don't have a formal task of a leader, the way you treat somebody and treat them in a way that treats them with dignity and respect is going to fill a leadership role, right?
Yeah.
So segueing off of that, we talked about this earlier, and I wanted you to explain too to the folks, how is staff health and welfare important with people that have experienced trauma? Why is that an important segment to trauma-informed care?
It is
And then Tracy just popped it up to it, by the way. Oh, so everybody can answer that too. But that was definitely where I was going next. Go ahead.
Right on. And I think that even ties in with Mackenzie's point of what they've been through and coming off, or working with clients that are coming off dangerous drugs. We are in a high burnout, fatigue profession. And if we are going to maintain our compassion and our professionalism, then we have to take care of ourselves. And just like it's imperative that we offer a safe environment for both employees and clients, we have to make sure that we're offering employees the opportunity to care for themselves, that we're promoting healthiness and well-being. And that's, for myself, it became exercise. I know I've shared with you in the past. I came home one day years ago and my kids were little, 5, 8-year-olds, and they're running around the house. And I had just had that super long, stressful day. I sat down in the recliner and my kids are running around playing. I'm like, would you guys shut up and get outside? And then it hit me, and it hit me hard. I had just yelled at my kids because they were too happy. And that's really when I knew that I had to find healthy outlets. And I'm a huge proponent for exercise, right? If when Howie and I travel together, we work out every morning. And it's just a great way to start the day. It clears your mind. I personally always feel better after working out. So yeah, that self-care is huge. And if we as employers promote that within our staff, we see less staff turnover. We see a higher quality of care. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and as you're speaking, we're having some really educated folks chime in on the chat, and going back up to where Trish said, just it summarizes it very well. If your own self-care isn't managed, taken care of, it's hard to impossible to care for someone else. And that is
Absolutely.
probably one of the biggest things I think people neglect, right? Because they ultimately, if they're not taking care of themselves, they do let the career path they've chosen turn over to a job, a 9 to 5. And if you're not taking care of yourself mentally, physically, and emotionally, you're not going to be able to help anyone else. And that creates an unsafe environment for staff and clients, right?
Right.
And
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 that's
that
Danielle touches on that point. Just that we may, if we're not caring for ourselves, we may inadvertently trigger a client. So we need to be healthy, happy, professional coming in so that that client gets our full attention.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Then we talk about, with being knowledgeable at trauma informed care, the empowerment that comes with it. And how do you see that? You see that as a two-sided street, or is it just staff only, or is it just patient only if they know or we know about trauma informed care?
Well, I think it benefits all parties involved, and it creates a healthier uh, work environment. It yeah, it just promotes. I see where we make treatment gains sooner by involving all parties. We have to work collectively, and we talk all the time in our training the importance of choice, and we talk about it in a crisis standpoint from de-escalation. But choice is so important to all parties involved, and when we have the opportunity um, to offer choice to our clients and we truly promote a partnership, we get buy-in so much sooner. So I believe it's huge.
Yeah, and just jumping on that also, I think with the empowerment, the phase of empowerment with trauma informed care, our clients are able to understand that we together want to find a pathway to recovery from that trauma. And there is, because I think a lot of clients, when they're in a situation and it gets out, the picture's been painted that there's been trauma involved, that's not the right place to take that trauma and get treatment, but it does create that pathway, and it can also lead to a separate diagnosis for help. So if you don't
Right.
take the time or care about to find out the whole patient background, you're going to miss a big part that might be geared towards the recovery, right?
And something that we talk about a lot in our Calm Every Storm, the beginner portion with the verbal, it's building that relationship and rapport. And so I can say honestly, there's a lot of times we'll get a client coming in, but those past traumas may not be documented. Um, and through having conversation and working with the client, we're provided more insight and to avoid that re-traumatization, and um, yeah, continuing to learn about the client.
Yeah, and just jumping back to the chat for a second, Mackenzie, I don't know if you ever visited our website before. Obviously, we don't have enough time to go into all the things you're expressing, but I think it's definitely a place for you to start for your facility or yourself to find answers to some of those questions that you're proposing. So I just offer that up to you because I sympathize with some of the things you're definitely saying.
Mm-hmm.
So Steve, wrapping up here, we got about 5 minutes left.
Yeah.
If a facility doesn't have currently trauma-informed care in their facility, what are some of the ways that they could actually start to evolve this or become proficient in trauma-informed care in their facility?
Well, I think the first step is a self-evaluation of your facility. And Harvard Press, I just looked at it today. They've got a great checklist that you can go through. And I think the importance is that everyone understands it's not a one-time training, and it has to be ongoing. And we have to continue to evaluate. And it's stepping away from that norm of this is how we do it to how can we work collectively together. So I think that's the first step, that evaluation of programming and staff. Do we have the right staff in the right position? Because you have to be able to you have to believe in trauma-informed care, and you have to be compassionate.
Absolutely. I would agree with that. And I think for me, some of the things I had were awareness and buy-in, right? People on these floors and people that are working, they have to have the mindset that trauma-informed care works, that it works for the client, it works for the staff member, right? And then supporting a culture of staff wellness. A lot of facilities I've been to are not advocates of staff wellness, right? It's like, if you take care of yourself on your own, that's great. Fortunately, where I worked, we realized that probably 15 years ago that wellness was important to law enforcement, right? And so they embodied a program where on your shift, you got 2 times a week, you had the ability to work out while you were at work, right?
Nice.
And it was a huge benefit, but I think it just goes along with how that physical release is gives you the ability for wellness, to clear your mind. And then I think the facilities need to have avenues for their staff for the mental and physical wellness. And that alone builds morale when the upper echelon is willing to support you in your overall wellness.
Absolutely.
Hiring members that buy into trauma-informed care, right? It could be that some if it's introduced, that some members don't agree with it. It's the hard way, the old school way, right? And then, and what's better for the overall objective for the facility and for the client? It's staff that buys into that this actually happens. So it could be, to a point where staff is separated because they don't buy in, and culture change is needed.
But go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say our experience is most people that buy into this are a lot of times the older staff, because they've done things the hard way and they don't mind doing things an easier way, and in a more humane way. I was going to say, like in our 5 steps, right? The first thing that's in it, the first thing in our 5 steps to de-escalation is what's in it for me.
For me, yeah.
As opposed to how a lot of programs are written, it's staff, client, it's not me. Why is it important for me to care about this person, right? So it goes right back to self wellness, which is kind of interesting when you look at trauma-informed care. The name itself kind of indicates that you're focusing on the client or the person that you're dealing with. Now that we've kind of dissected it some, we really realize how much it's about too. And it goes back to the comment where if you don't take care of yourself, you can't care for anybody else.
Right.
So I would just go ahead, in the last 30 seconds here, Steve, I'm going to let you tie up all the loose ends.
All right. I appreciate it. So the one comment I see restraint is the last resort. We don't punish, we work with, we give options. That's perfect. That is a trauma-informed approach. And I think this is something we could have talked for hours about today.
Absolutely.
And not that it's a step-by-step guide, but it's an overlapping philosophy and approach. And I think the more that we can be trauma-informed, the less likely we are to re-trigger, even inadvertently with clients. Take that time. There's so many resources out there. Please read up on it, because I really feel that trauma informed is the future of treatment and with how we work with clients. If I'll throw out a quick, if you want more information from us, Howie and I would love the opportunity to come and teach at your facility, whether it's de-escalation or active threat. Yeah, it's always great talking with you. I appreciate everyone. And I saw Tracy put the link. If you want a certificate from today's group, go ahead and click on that link and we'll get that sent to you as well.
And one last thing before I bid you guys goodbye, you knew I was going to jump back in here, Steve, but with that email that Tracy's put out there, you can also, if you guys have any topics that we haven't discussed that you'd like us to touch on, by all means, shoot an email there, and Tammy will get it to us, and we'll make sure to bring up some of those topics of interest. I just want to thank you all again today for joining in with us. You're a great group. Thanks for the chat. Really excited to have someone from across the big pond joining us. So we'll look forward to seeing you, and let your friends over there in Paraguay know about us. And you guys have a great day. Stay safe.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you.